The suffocating weight of the Forrester name has finally become too heavy for Electra Forrester to bear. For weeks, she has been trapped in a relentless psychological labyrinth, caught between the explosive, unpredictable violence of Will Spencer and the overbearing, dictatorial control of her grandfather, Ridge Forrester. Ridge's recent ultimatums were not born out of genuine familial love or protective instinct, but out of a desperate, authoritarian need for absolute control. He demanded that she sever all ties with Will, utilizing Eric Forrester's accidental injury at the bikini bar as the ultimate emotional weapon to enforce her compliance. Electra, emotionally battered and exhausted by the constant manipulation from every corner of her life, suddenly experienced a moment of profound, shattering clarity. She realized that within the gilded, glamorous walls of Forrester Creations, she was never truly viewed as an independent woman with her own agency. Instead, she was merely a pawn on Ridge's grand chessboard, a piece to be moved, manipulated, and sacrificed in his never-ending, bitter blood feud against the Spencer family. The realization was as chilling as it was liberating, awakening a fierce rebellion deep within her soul. Walking through the luxurious, glass-paneled corridors of Forrester Creations, Electra felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. The legacy that was supposed to be her glorious birthright now felt like a beautifully decorated, inescapable prison cell. Every portrait on the wall, every whispered conversation in the design rooms, and every stitch of haute couture echoed with the toxic demands of her bloodline. Ridge's voice, booming with patriarchal authority, constantly reminded her of what a true Forrester should do and who she should associate with. But what did it actually mean to be a Forrester in this modern era? To Electra, it increasingly meant sacrificing her own happiness, her own autonomy, and her own peace of mind to serve the fragile ego of a family that thrived on high-stakes drama and hypocrisy. She could no longer stomach the glaring double standards of Ridge condemning Will's violence while completely ignoring his own extensive history of physical altercations, including his recent assault on Bill Spencer. The moral high ground the Forresters claimed to stand on was rapidly crumbling beneath her feet. In a bold, unprecedented move that sent absolute shockwaves through the upper echelons of the Los Angeles fashion world, Electra made the ultimate sacrifice to reclaim her sanity. She marched into the executive office, looked her domineering family members dead in the eye, and officially renounced her inheritance. She did not just resign from her prestigious position managing the jewelry line. She walked away from the Forrester fortune, the immense privilege, and the suffocating protection of the family name. It was a fierce declaration of independence that left Ridge completely speechless and R.J. Forrester utterly blindsided. Electra packed her bags, leaving behind the sprawling estates, the luxurious beach houses, and the endless wealth, and moved into a small, unassuming apartment on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in her entire life, she was completely alone, stripped of her wealth and royal titles, but finally breathing the crisp, unpolluted air of true freedom. The transition to her new, humble reality was stark but deeply therapeutic for the young heiress. Electra's small apartment was a far cry from the opulent mansions and penthouse suites she was accustomed to. There were no sweeping ocean views, no private chefs preparing her meals, and no security details tracking her every move. Yet, in the quiet, undisturbed solitude of her modest living space, she found a profound sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She began seeking employment outside the glittering, cutthroat sphere of high fashion, desperate to build a life where her successes and failures were entirely her own doing. She wanted to be valued for her raw talent and her work ethic, not for the famous last name printed on her birth certificate or the connections her grandfather could leverage. It was a brave, terrifying leap into the unknown, a testament to her immense inner strength and her absolute refusal to be broken by the toxic dynamics of her family. However, Electra's desperate bid for independence triggered a catastrophic psychological unraveling in R.J. Forrester. RJ had meticulously orchestrated Will Spencer's downfall, intentionally ducking during the bar brawl so that Eric would take the punch, thereby successfully painting Will as an unhinged, violent monster. RJ believed that by eliminating his rival through this calculated deception, Electra would naturally fall into his arms, a compliant and grateful prize who would look to him as her savior. He thrived on the grand illusion of being the good guy, the protective, loving cousin who would save her from the dangerous Spencer heir. But Electra's sudden departure shattered his carefully constructed fantasy into a million jagged pieces. The realization that he could not control her, that she would rather live in a tiny, cramped apartment than be under his watchful, obsessive eye, ignited a dark, terrifying fury within him. RJ's descent into madness was subtle at first, masked by a sickening facade of familial concern. He convinced himself and others that Electra was just confused, that she was making a terrible, impulsive mistake by walking away from her legacy and her safety. But as the days turned into weeks, his need to dominate her life mutated into something deeply sinister and pathological. He simply could not accept the loss of control over the woman he viewed as his rightful property. RJ began to track her movements with frightening precision, obsessively monitoring her attempts to secure new employment and build a life without him. Whenever Electra managed to land a promising job interview or a small, independent design gig, RJ would quietly, maliciously intervene. Utilizing the vast resources, wealth, and industry influence of Forrester Creations, he pulled strings behind the scenes, ensuring that doors were abruptly slammed in her face. He was systematically and ruthlessly destroying her independent life, hoping to starve her into submission so she would have no choice but to come crawling back to the Forrester fold. The sabotage was ruthless, calculated, and executed with chilling efficiency. Electra would arrive at a new boutique, portfolio in hand, full of hope, only to be told that the position had suddenly been filled by a highly recommended candidate. She would secure a freelance contract to design a small jewelry line, only to have the client mysteriously cancel the agreement hours later, citing unforeseen budget constraints. RJ watched from the shadows, his handsome features twisted into a mask of smug, arrogant satisfaction. He justified his horrific actions with a twisted, warped logic, convincing himself that he was doing this for her own good. In his mind, the outside world was far too harsh and unforgiving for a delicate Forrester, and he was merely guiding her back to the safety of the family and, more importantly, back to his side. He completely failed to see the sheer cruelty and psychological abuse of his actions, blinded by his own toxic entitlement and his desperate, all-consuming need to possess her. But RJ's obsession did not stop at professional sabotage. His paranoia demanded more. His greatest, most paralyzing fear was that Electra's newfound independence, despite his efforts to crush it, might eventually lead her back into the arms of Will Spencer. Despite the explosive, violent end to their relationship, RJ knew deep down that the bond between Electra and Will was profound, passionate, and deeply rooted in genuine love. To ensure that the door to Will was permanently, irrevocably sealed, RJ orchestrated a psychological masterstroke of manipulation that bordered on pure evil. He knew that Melissa Dillon had been harboring a desperate, opportunistic infatuation with Will, having already taken advantage of Will's drunken vulnerability in the past. RJ, preying on Dillon's ambitions and Will's continued emotional fragility, meticulously staged a devastating scene designed to break Electra's heart forever. RJ manipulated the circumstances with the precision of a seasoned sociopath, ensuring that Electra would be at a specific location at the exact right time. He sent an anonymous tip regarding a potential job lead, guiding her to an upscale lounge where he had already set his trap. As Electra walked into the dimly lit venue, her heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Through the shadows and the haze of the lounge, she saw Will, seemingly happy, relaxed, and intimately entangled with another woman, Melissa Dillon. The lighting, the positioning, the carefully choreographed laughter that RJ had likely paid for or manipulated into existence, it was all designed to inflict maximum, soul-crushing emotional trauma. RJ stood out of sight, watching the devastation wash over Electra's beautiful face. He wanted her to believe that Will had effortlessly moved on, that her sacrifices and her pain meant nothing, and that she was utterly, entirely replaceable. It was an act of emotional terrorism designed to break her spirit completely and drive her back into his waiting arms. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, RJ's cruel scheme worked flawlessly. Electra felt the crushing weight of betrayal press down on her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. The sight of Will with another woman, especially someone who had already caused a rift between them, seemed to validate every horrible, venomous thing Ridge had ever said about the Spencers. She turned and fled into the night, tears streaming down her face, feeling more isolated, broken, and alone than ever before in her entire life. RJ stepped out of the shadows as she left, a triumphant, sickening smirk playing on his lips. He truly believed he had won the ultimate victory, that he had successfully severed the last remaining emotional tie between Electra and her former life. He prepared to swoop in the next day as the comforting, reliable savior, ready to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart and mold her into the perfect, obedient partner he always desired. However, RJ severely underestimated Electra's sharp intelligence and her fierce, underlying resilience. In the quiet, haunting aftermath of the staged betrayal, as the initial shock began to wear off and the tears dried, Electra's mind began to race with analytical precision. She noticed the glaring inconsistencies in the narrative presented to her. The timing of the job tip was too perfect, the location too convenient, the lighting too dramatic. She recalled the subtle, manipulative comments RJ had made in the days leading up to the event, probing her about her feelings for Will and her whereabouts. The pieces of the puzzle slowly began to snap together, forming a horrifying, undeniable picture of deception. Electra realized that the scene had been entirely manufactured, a theatrical illusion orchestrated by someone who knew her deepest vulnerabilities and had the resources to exploit them. The epiphany hit Electra with the devastating force of a freight train. The sudden, inexplicable sabotage of her jobs, the constant, suffocating presence whenever she felt weak, the perfectly timed staged betrayal, it all pointed back to one single, undeniable source: RJ. The chilling realization sent violent shivers down her spine. As she analyzed his recent behavior, his possessiveness, and his smug satisfaction at Will's downfall, a terrifying parallel emerged in her mind. She was not just dealing with an overprotective, jealous family member. She was dealing with a dangerous, calculating obsessive. Electra realized, with absolute, paralyzing horror, that RJ was slowly but surely morphing into a younger version of Thomas Forrester during his darkest, most unhinged era. The memories of Thomas's past atrocities flooded her mind, painting a grim picture of her current reality. The manipulation of Hope Logan, the obsessive stalking, the use of a lifelike mannequin, the relentless psychological warfare that had nearly destroyed the entire family. Thomas had been consumed by toxic fixations that blinded him to morality. Now, RJ was walking down that exact same dark, twisted path, utilizing the same playbook of manipulation, isolation, and control to bend Electra to his will. RJ was no longer the sweet, supportive cousin he pretended to be in front of Ridge and Brooke. He was a predator, hiding behind a charming smile and the powerful, protective shield of the Forrester name. The realization that her own flesh and blood was capable of such extreme, sociopathic behavior left Electra feeling physically sick and deeply unsafe. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Will Spencer had ever done to her. Will's violence was born out of fiery passion, provocation, and a tragic lack of emotional control, but RJ's actions were cold, calculated, and deeply, intentionally malicious. Electra saw the entire Forrester family in a terrifying new light. They were not protectors of their legacy, they were captors who demanded absolute submission. Ridge's dictatorial control had bred a toxic culture where manipulation and deceit were perfectly acceptable as long as they served the family's overarching agenda. Electra knew that if she confronted RJ directly, he would simply gaslight her, utilizing the family's vast resources and Ridge's blind favoritism to paint her as unstable, stressed, or confused. She was entirely outmatched on this battlefield. She could not fight the massive, well-funded Forrester machine alone, not when they controlled the narrative and the industry. Desperation breeds unlikely, dangerous alliances. Electra knew she needed immense power, untethered influence, and a ruthless, unapologetic edge to combat the toxic forces trying to control and ruin her life. She needed someone who was completely unafraid of Ridge Forrester, someone who thrived in the mud and the blood of corporate and personal warfare, and someone who possessed the resources to crush RJ's sabotage. There was only one man in Los Angeles who fit that exact description perfectly. Taking a deep breath and steeling her resolve with a newfound, icy determination, Electra made a decision that would forever alter the landscape of the fashion dynasties. She walked into the towering, glass-encased headquarters of Spencer Publications, bypassed the intimidating security desk with a fierce, unwavering glare, and demanded an immediate, private meeting with Dollar Bill Spencer. The sheer irony of the situation was not lost on Electra. She was a Forrester, born and bred in the heart of the enemy camp, willingly walking into the lion's den of her family's greatest, most hated rival. But she was no longer playing by Ridge's restrictive, hypocritical rules. As she stepped into Bill's expansive, commanding office, she was met with the piercing, calculating gaze of the Spencer patriarch. Bill leaned back in his luxurious leather chair, a slow, deeply amused smirk spreading across his face. He had spent decades battling the Forresters, trading blows and stealing companies, and now one of their brightest, most promising stars was standing in his office, actively seeking his protection and his wrath. It was a scenario even the great Bill Spencer could not have predicted, but one he was more than ready to exploit to its absolute fullest potential. Electra did not mince words, nor did she show an ounce of fear. She laid everything on the table with brutal honesty. Ridge's suffocating, dictatorial control, her bold decision to renounce her inheritance, and the terrifying, obsessive lengths RJ was going to in order to sabotage her life and isolate her. She detailed the staged betrayal involving Will and Melissa Dillon, drawing the chilling, undeniable comparison between RJ's current behavior and Thomas Forrester's dark, psychotic era. Electra looked Bill dead in the eye, her posture rigid and her voice steady, and asked for his help. She needed the immense, unstoppable power of Spencer Publications to shield her from RJ's relentless sabotage and to help her build a new, impenetrable life where the Forresters could not reach her. In return, she offered Bill the ultimate, devastating weapon, inside knowledge of the Forrester family's deepest vulnerabilities, their current operational weaknesses, and the unparalleled satisfaction of striking a devastating, personal blow to Ridge's fragile ego. Bill Spencer's eyes gleamed with a dangerous, predatory excitement that sent a thrill through the room. He had always respected true strength, and the undeniable fire burning in Electra's eyes was magnificent. She was no longer the fragile, conflicted girl torn between the loyalties of two warring families. She was a fierce warrior, ready to burn down the toxic legacy that had tried to enslave and silence her. Bill stood up, walking slowly around his massive desk, the iconic sword necklace glinting against his chest. He knew that taking Electra under his wing and funding her independence would escalate the ongoing war with Ridge to apocalyptic levels. It would be a brutal, merciless conflict that would leave massive casualties on both sides of the fashion divide. But for Dollar Bill Spencer, the golden opportunity to utterly humiliate Ridge by becoming the savior and champion of his own granddaughter was simply too delicious, too poetic to pass up.